Hi, I'm Rashonda. I'm the creator of this YouTube channel as well as the artbyro.com website where you can find over 200 art and drawing tutorials. In today's video, I'm going to be using some brand new markers, which you can see over here. They are from the Ohuhu company. They sent me some markers to try out and gave me that nice case to put them in, as well as a marker pad, and I'll show you all of that in the video. Spoiler alert, they are some pretty nice markers. I really enjoyed using them. They did take a little bit getting used to because of the brush tip, which I'm not used to using because, as you know, if you've watched any of my previous videos, I typically work smaller and they don't work very well for that. So in this one, I'm doing a freedom drawing that was part of the weekly challenge in the Facebook group, and I'll put a link to the Facebook group in there, as well as to the markers and some other information in the description box, so don't forget to check that out. Now let's go ahead and go on over to the art studio and get started. My Ohuhu markers came today. I just opened the box and here's everything that was inside that they sent me. I got a shelf to put the markers in. That comes in really handy. 120 marker set and a marker pad. So I'm really excited to try these out and see how they are. I've never heard of this brand before. They contacted me and asked me to try out their products. So I'm really excited to try these out. I love getting new markers. I love experimenting with different brands and trying them out and trying to just find the perfect marker that I love working with. So let's go ahead and dig on into using these. So here are the new markers. This is a 120 set. And I love that it comes with the color swatch charts. These are really nice. So this is going to be the first thing that I'll do is I'll go ahead and color all these in so I can see what the markers look like. And also it gives you a little bit of a feel for them and how they work, how much they bleed, all those sorts of things. So that'll be the first thing that I'll do. And then I'll be taking them out of this case and putting them into the shelf so that they're laying on their sides. Your markers will last longer if they lay on their sides than if they're laying or being stored up and down. Then all of the solvent will go to one end, but if they're laying on the side, they don't dry out as much. Sometimes if they're stored this way, whatever's up is going to dry out before the rest of the marker dries out. So I think that's the reason why they recommend storing them on their side. So I'm going to fill in this chart, and then I'm going to probably organize them by color groups. That's usually how I store my markers. I like to group them by colors. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll get started on doing some drawings with these guys. On the charts, there's two of them. This set has 120 markers in it, and they're dual tipped. So one end has this brush tip and one end has a chisel tip. And then if you look at the end of the cap, it'll have Y1 and then here's Y1. So pretty simple, pretty easy to follow through on what needs to happen here and just fill that in. This one's Y2, and you can try either the brush tip or the chisel tip just to get used to using them. It helps with the control because you do want to stay inside that box. It'll just help you use the different tips of the marker, get it filled in solid, but try to stay inside the lines there. So I'm going to go ahead and work on this, and I'm going to speed that up a little bit, and I will come back when I'm done. Okay, so I'm just finishing up here. I have just this bottom row left to do. I got the other card done. There's 2 cards with this one. One thing I'm finding out, number one, my eyes aren't as young as they used to be, which is making it a bit difficult to see these little squares. But also with this brush tip, it's a little harder to control in the small areas, which I knew it would be. It's something that I can probably get a little bit better at, I'm sure, and get used to a little bit, but I'm used to my markers having a finer point at one end. And the brush tip, you can get into some somewhat fine detail, but it is a bit harder to control than if you have more of like a bullet tip. The other thing I wanted to note is that, and I think it's because of the brush tip, you have to be careful when taking the caps off because it will splatter the ink onto the paper when you remove the cap. And I think it's from the brush tip. And when you pull the cap off, if you don't pull the cap straight out, I think what it's doing is hitting the brush tip and splattering it. Because I did have on this card some spots you can see where it kind of splattered the ink a little bit. So I think you just have to be careful. What I found is if you pull the caps off and then just pull them straight out, that doesn't happen. So not a big deal, but definitely could ruin a drawing if you're just popping the caps off and it splatters the ink. But here are the 2 swatches. Now these are really nice. I like doing these with my marker sets, and I love that this came with them already printed out because it will give you an idea of what your markers will actually look like. And it also gives you a little bit of practice using them so you can get a feel for how the markers are, how they work, how the tips work, all those sorts of things. So it's a little bit tedious, but definitely a worthwhile exercise. So I'm gonna wrap this part of the video up here. Just wanted to show you these, and then we'll move on to doing some drawing with them. Here are the markers inside the marker shelf. You can see my other one in the background. I have my other markers. So these I did organize by the color chart. So as I use them, I just put them in order of the charts. On the left side is the first chart, on the right side is the second one. But as you can see, some of them are mixed up, like up in here, there's some purples. I like to keep the colors together. So I would like to move the purples down and move the pinks up with the pink. So as I use them more, and I can organize them a little bit better, but this is okay for now. I'm not sure why they put this random pink down with the grays instead of with the pink colors, but it's those sorts of things. Like when I'm organizing my markers, I would never have a pink over here. I like to group them together. As you can see in my other one with my other markers, I have my greens together, my blues together, my yellows together, and it helps when I'm choosing my colors to at least be in the right area of my storage to get the ones I need. So that's it. It's a pretty heavy duty solid wooden shelf holder for the markers. So it's pretty nice. So far I'm impressed with the products. They seem good quality. The true test is going to be doing some artwork with it. So let's go ahead and move on to that. But here is the paper pad that came with the package that they sent me. This is 120 pounds. It's 10 by 7.6 inches. And this is pretty cool. So it comes with this little plastic mat that you can put between the pages if you're working in the pad itself. And also the marker set came with like a half size one of these, which is really nice because the markers will bleed through to the back side of the paper. So what you would do is just put that between the pages and then you don't have to worry about it bleeding through. You could also use this to put something smaller on top of it to protect your table surface. If you've seen my other videos, you are familiar with this that I put behind when I do my artist trading cards. So I could do the same thing with this plastic mat where I could put that down and use this as kind of a blotter behind it. I'm not sure how it would work on a card, if the wet ink would smear, so that would be something to keep in mind, but kind of the same concept though, just trying to not ruin things while you're doing your artwork. So that's nice that the marker pad comes with that. That's a neat idea. So I'm going to do my drawing. I'm going to use the paper from the pad because I do want to try out their paper and see how it works out. But I think what I will do, so these are perforated. So what I'm going to do is tear a sheet out of here and use it on its own because I don't like trying to draw on top of a stack of paper. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll be back to get started. I have a page tore out of the pad. I put this underneath. This is pretty heavy paper, so I don't know how much it's going to actually bleed through, but they provided it, so I'm going to put it down there. I feel like it might not be necessary because of the weight of that paper. It's a pretty heavyweight paper, so I think it's at 180 pounds. But I feel like these markers aren't going to bleed through there too bad. But I'm going to go ahead and put that mat behind there. So I'm going to do the word freedom. I have in the Facebook group, if you're a member, then you know there's a weekly word prompt. And freedom is coming up because we're getting close to the July 4th holiday, the U.S. holiday, the Independence Day is coming up. So that's one of the prompts in there. So I'm going to go ahead and do something to participate in that. And I'm thinking some kind of, obviously I'll do a flag in the background. There's other things that could be done that would also be along the lines of the patriotic theme. But what I'm thinking is freedom going across the bottom and just some block letters and then some kind of flag design in the background. And I'm thinking maybe doing an optical art flag in the background. I have a couple different ones that I have tutorials for, and I'm thinking maybe using something like that in the background. I haven't quite decided yet, so sometimes I have an idea of what I want to do, but I don't have it all the way figured out yet. So I just work with what I know for sure, and then everything will come together as I go. So I'm thinking you can have your letters in different shapes. I'm thinking maybe either just straight or kind of an arch, so maybe about this much of the paper. And I like to draw some light guides. I don't know how much the camera is going to pick this up, but I think you get the idea here. And then the other thing I like to do with my lettering is to know roughly where the center point is. And I'll make a little mark there because all this is going to get erased and it's going to get covered up with markers anyway. So, and you can always use, if you don't want to erase the lines but you need to lighten them up, you can always use a kneaded eraser, and you would just dab it on the pencil lines and it'll pull some of that up and lighten it, so you can cover it up with marker if you need to do that also. So what I like to do with my lettering is to know where the middle point of my word is. So freedom has 7 letters. There's 2 E's. The second E is my center point. So that E needs to be right here in the center. So often what I will do is start with that. Another thing you can do, and I have videos and written tutorials that explain all this, you can also divide your paper up where your lettering is going to be. You can kind of make some guides and just add some lines here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's 7. They don't necessarily have to be exactly even because your letters are going to flow into each other. Or mine are, the way that I'm drawing them. You don't have to draw them that way. I think it looks more interesting. So I have this blocked out, so it would be F-R-E-E-D-O-M. And the M's going to take up a little bit of space. There's going to be some overlapping going on. But this at least gives you a rough idea of where your letters are going to go. Then you could also write the actual letter in there. If you're newer to doing lettering, I'll often show that you can do the letter. These are just going to be block letters, so it's not going to be nothing too fancy. But you can angle them different. You can position them different. And by doing just the regular letters on here first, you can work through all that if you feel like you need to. So I have the E going that way. I'll go ahead and show you what I'm talking about here. And I'm drawing this out very lightly. Hopefully the video picks it up. But I might have this E going that way, this one coming down here. I could have my O kind of floating up there. So there's a lot of different things that you can do with your letters. One thing you want to think about is you want them to be interesting to look at. So, for example, for the M, I might want to bring this side up higher than that, just to give it a little variation, make it look a bit more interesting. And then as you go, you'll have to figure out how you want your letters to overlap. This E I could bring down this way. And then my R. R is another one that's going to take up a little bit more space. So some letters are going to be wider than others. If you were doing an I with just a square or a circle dot, it's not going to take up as much space as, say, like an R is going to take up. In some letters, you can kind of shrink in a little bit easier than others. An F would be easier to shrink down than, say, like an R or a D or an M. An M's going to be a little bit wider. I think I'll have this one come down this way. And then also you can overlap them, and that saves you some space. So don't freak out too much about how much space you have here. It looks like there's not a lot of space, but once you start doing it, there's room as you can move this stuff around, overlap them a little bit. But by doing this, I can see what the letters are going to look like. I can get a little bit better image of what the overall design is going to look like. If I want to change anything, do I want to make this O come down further? Do I like how the O is going to look in position to the other letters? All those sorts of things come a little bit more clear. Okay, so let's go ahead and start blocking these out. I like starting with the middle, but you can start anywhere. It really doesn't matter. And if you draw the entire letter, which is often referred to in art as drawing through something. So if you draw all your letters out, it doesn't really matter which one you do first, because you're going to draw them all the same anyway, and then erase the overlapping parts where you don't want them. So what I'm going to do is use these letters that I drew out as my guide, and I'm going to go right around them. So part of the drawing through with your letters, if you want to keep this section even, you can draw this as a separate part of the letter and then add in these, I don't know what you would call them, these little arms that come out on the E. You could do that, and that will keep this even if you want it to be even. But oftentimes in your lettering art, it will look more interesting if they're not even. So maybe we want this one, this top part, to be wider than the bottom part, and we can have this narrow as it comes down. And in that case, you could still draw it that way. But that would be more like that. So you want to think about different ways to make your lettering art more interesting to look at. So even though we're doing just simple block style lettering, there's still things we can do to jazz it up a little bit, make it a little less boring, not just a plain flat out block lettering. And of course there's tons of different styles of lettering that you could do. So there's the E. Now when I do my other E, I'm probably, even though it's tipped at a different angle, I'll still want to keep it consistent with this E. And I'm also going to want to keep this consistent throughout my drawing. So when I make my R, I'll probably want to have this narrow as it comes down this way. And think about these elements that I added into the E and do that for the rest of the letters. So all I'm going to do is just keep working my way through this. So when I talk about drawing through, I would have my D come all the way down and draw it straight through this part of the E. And then later on, I will have to decide if the E is going to be in front of the D or behind the D, and which parts are going to be erased. Part of that's going to be for purposes of legibility. If you're, depending on the type of lettering you're doing, there's something called wild style that is not as legible as some of the other lettering styles. And that's kind of an intentional, the letters all flow in together and they blend together. It's not something I've played around with too much. I like my art to be a little bit more legible, so it's not something that has ever really interested me a ton. But if that's something you're into, then you can think about maybe you want your letters to all flow in together, or they can be tucked back behind each other. And in that case, you have to determine, is the E going to be in front of the D or behind the D? And that really just comes down to just a personal preference and legibility. Some letters, if you cover up parts of it, that will make it very difficult to read, then you might not want to do it that way. Now, the other thing that you can do with your letters, sometimes you're always going to use the letter that you drew out as your guide. Sometimes it'll end up being in the center of this guide part of it will be in the center and sometimes it won't be. So like the O, I kept the O exactly where it was because that's how it fit with the other letters around it. Same thing with this M. I'm probably going to have to shift a little bit. I can still use this as a guide, but I'm going to have to shift the letters to fit it into the space. So don't worry too much about your feeling like your guide has to be something that can't be changed a little bit, because you're definitely going to have to make some adjustments as you go, but don't get too hung up on where everything's at and that it needs to stay where you originally put it. It's just one of the biggest things that it does making the guidelines is that you're not just staring at a blank piece of paper. That can be very intimidating. So if you can start getting some guides on there, then you kind of get past that. It's a little bit of a cheat to get past that blank page. They call it the blank page syndrome. If you get some guides on there, it can get you taking those first steps and get you moving. But don't feel like they're written in stone. They're just guides. They're there to help show you a path of where you're going with your artwork. So there's my M. And then I'm just going to keep working on this. I'm going to do the other E. I'll do the F. I'll do the R. And then the next step will be to put an outline on this and then get it cleaned up and work on the background. So I'm going to go ahead and speed up the rest of the lettering. I'm just going to continue with the same process that I started with, and I will be back when I have those done. Now I have all the letters drawn out. The next step is to decide how they're going to overlap, and you can do them however you want. So since all the letters were drawn straight through the other letters, we can see everything, which is good, and then you just decide how you want them to overlap. So I decided for this one, I'm just gonna go straight across, so the F will overlap the R will overlap the E, and I'll continue on that way. So all you need to do is erase where those letters overlap, and a lot of this extra stuff will go away. I don't worry too much about that, because after I outline, I'll erase with a block eraser, and all these extra lines will go away. And I made the O a little bit bigger. I thought it looked funny being so much smaller than the rest of the letters. And then you can clean your drawing up if you need to. There's still a lot of extra lines in there, but like I said, I'm going to use this big eraser after I do all my outlining. And so this will just be a lot easier. So I'm going to wait until I do that. So at this point, you can outline your letters, and I typically outline my letters in black. You can do them in another color if you'd like. I'm going to stick with black for this one. Or you can use a marker, you can use a pen. I usually use these Sharpie pens. They make a nice, dark, crisp outline. If you use a marker, the outline ends up being a little bit fuzzy. And I don't know on this paper, because I don't think it's a marker specific. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the products that they sent. It just says paper pad. It doesn't say, I know they have like a bleed proof marker paper, but since that's not what this is, I think I'll stick with my pen. So at this point, you can do your background. Usually what I end up doing is I outline my letters and then I do my background separate. So a lot of times I'll outline my letters, I'll color my letters, and then I'll do my background last. If you want your background to kind of interact with your letters, then of course you'd have to do that before you do the outline. And what I mean by that is if you had, just as an example, if you had flowers or something in the background and you wanted some vines to wrap around your letters, you'd have to do that now before you do any of your outlining. But I'm going to go ahead and outline my letters. Then I will take my block eraser, go over top of everything, clean up the rest of the pencil lines, and then I'll be ready to either move on to drawing out the background or adding color to the lettering. So what I'm going to do is literally just trace over top of the pencil with the black marker. And it doesn't really matter where you start. You can start on it wherever you want. Make sure you turn your paper to get to the best angle so you're not at an awkward angle when you're drawing or when you're outlining or whatever it is you're doing. You want to make sure you're at a good angle for your doing your lines. So what I do is go over top of everything once, and then I'll go back over it to make it thicker. And that's the only bad thing about using the pen, is that you do have to go over it multiple times if you want to have a heavier outline. I don't mind this. I find this part of doing the drawing very relaxing for me, so it doesn't feel tedious. But what I would do is just go right next to the lines I already did and make it as wide as I want it to be. So however thick you want your outline to be, just keep going over it until it gets a little bit thicker. And again, you could use a marker or something else, a brush pen, whatever you want to use for your outline. And then you could also add, if you want to add a drop shadow, or if you wanted to do a 3D effect, that would need to be done either right after you do your outline, or you could do it at the pencil stage of it. But I'm going to go ahead and speed this up as I do this, and then I will be back when this outline's done. Now that I got everything outlined, I'm ready to start adding some color. You could also do your background first, but I'm going to go ahead and get started on the letters, get those all colored in. So because the word's freedom, I want to go with a red, white, and blue kind of a theme here. So I want to do blue for the letters, and then I think I'm going to do something red and white in the background. So what I did, and I'm only using my new Ohuhu markers that I got sent to me. So what I did was I picked 3 different blues. I'm going to do blue on the letters. I'm going to fade it from dark to light. So what I did was found 3 blue markers that are similar to each other, but have some variation in it, because I want the colors where they come together, I want them to blend. I don't want hard edges there. So I have 3 different blues. And then what I usually do is I just try them out on a scrap piece of paper to see how they look. And then, so there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can make it so the colors kind of connect going all the way across. I don't do that. When I do mine, I usually do each one individually, and I don't worry about where one color ends. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I'm going to try using the brush tip of it, because that's not something that I normally use. Most of my markers, when I bought them, these brush tips weren't as popular. So I've not used the brush tip a whole lot, and I want to try them out and see how they are. So one of the things with the markers, with the alcohol markers, they'll blend together, but only while the marker's still wet. So you don't want to do your blue all the way across and then do your next blue all the way across, because that alcohol is going to evaporate, and you don't want that. Once the alcohol evaporates, it's going to be harder to blend them. The more it evaporates, the harder it is. And once it's completely evaporated, you're not going to get that same ability to blend. So what I'll do is fill in my darkest color, and then I'll do the next lightest. And the set did come with a colorless blender. Most sets do come with that. I've never really used it. To be honest, the only thing I've ever used the colorless blender for is kind of as an eraser. If you go outside the lines a little bit, you can use that colorless blender to make that area wet, and it'll make that pigment absorb into the paper, and it lightens it up quite a bit. It won't get rid of it altogether, but you can minimize how visible it is and kind of save your drawing that way. So what I usually do is where the 2 colors come together, I just go back over it with the lightest color and soften up that transition. So that's it for that first letter. And then I'll repeat the same thing for the next one. So I will just start with my dark color again. And this has 2 tips. There's a broad tip, but like I said earlier, I've not had a lot of opportunity to use the brush tips a lot, so I want to try those out. So I'm pretty much just gonna stick with the brush tip as much as I can. And also I'm going to limit myself just to this marker set and not use any of my other markers, which normally what I will do with my artwork is I'll use all of my markers. I'll interchange brands, mix and match them. They're all alcohol based, so they can be used together. I normally just pick whichever colors I need I don't worry about what brand I'm using. But for this drawing, because they were kind enough to send me a set of markers, I want to try using just that set so I can give a good, kind of a good review of that set, because the benefit of buying the sets is that it's usually cheaper. But the downside of the sets is that if you don't have a good color range, then you're going to be stuck if you're trying to do something like this where you're blending your colors together, because you need certain markers to be able to do that. So I want to give the set itself a good trial and see how it is as far as the selection of colors that comes with it. And so far, it seems pretty good. I was able to find a good variety of blues for my letters. So that's good. There's quite a few of each. So there's a lot of greens, there's a lot of reds. So far it seems like the color selection, the variety of colors is good. So I like that. So I am going to finish these up in a time lapse, I think. So I'm just going to keep doing the same thing. And I did learn from doing the color swatch to be careful when I remove the cap, because I think it's because of the brush tip being flexible. When you just yank the cap off, it'll splatter pigment, and I don't want that on my drawing. So I mentioned that earlier, but I want to mention it again now that I'm doing my actual drawing. You do want to be careful how you remove the caps on them. I learned that the hard way. So I'm going to speed this up, finish up the blues, and then I'll be back and it'll be time to work on the background. Okay, so I got the colors all filled in. I want to show you, I didn't do this on purpose, this was by accident here, but right here the blue went outside the outline a little bit. So this is the colorless blender. If you just kind of scrub that a little bit, it'll lift that up and get rid of it. So you do have that option with the alcohol-based markers. If you make a mistake, you can lighten it a little bit. It doesn't take it away completely. You can still see a little bit there. I don't want to go into the color where the letter's at. So you can't get too close because it will pull that up too. But it'll lift it up a little bit, so that's nice. you know, because the markers are pretty much permanent, but as long as they're still wet, you can kind of use that colorless blender as an eraser. So I have all the letters filled in, got all the colors done. One thing I am noticing about, I think it's just the brush, this brush tip, they're a little bit messy. But I think it's, like I said earlier, I think it's because they're flexible. So they kind of tend to get on things. I have them on my hands, which I normally don't do. But I think that's just, I don't think that's anything negative about the markers or the brush tip. I think it's just me not being used to working with that type of a marker. But one thing you do want to be careful, like I said earlier, is that with that brush tip, and it does tend to get, like, it gets in the caps. I don't know if you can see that. It gets all over in the caps. It gets on your hands a little bit. So just something to be mindful of, that's all. So now I need to decide what I want to do with the background. I'm leaning towards some kind of a flag design, but more of an optical art or like an abstract. And I think since I have the blue on the letters, I'm just going to stick with red and white on the background. So I'm going to think about that a little bit, and then I'll be back when I have that straightened out and have decided on what I want to do. Now I can leave these letters as is. What I do a lot of times with my graffiti type art is I call it a halo, where I will block out around these letters so that the letters are completely separate from the background. But I want to do something different with this one. I like to try different things and experiment a little bit. So I'll take some chances. I'm not afraid to take chances live while I'm doing the videos. My goal is never to pretend that I'm perfect and I don't make mistakes. My goal is really just to encourage you to have fun and try things and enjoy the process of creating art. So a lot of times when I make these videos, I'm making decisions as I go because I want you to see what that process looks like and to not always be striving for perfectionism, but just having fun, enjoying, and not being afraid to go ahead and do things. So I'm going to give this a little bit of thought and come up with an idea of what I want to do, and then I'll be back and we'll work on that. So I think what I want to do is a waving flag optical illusion in the back. Normally this would be done to look like a flag, but I think what I'll do is just the red and white, just the stripe part, since I have the blue here. I could put the blue up here. That would tie that in with that. I might do that. I'll decide that as I go. So what I want to do is make some lines for my background. And I want them, I'm going to go ahead and put them behind these letters. And I'm trying to decide if I want to do that halo type around it, that effect around it, or if I want the stripes of the flag to show up directly behind and through these letters. So creating your artwork is just a series of decisions that you need to make. And sometimes you're not going to know what the right or wrong decision is until you just do it. So sometimes you have to just go for it. And that's why I say that I'm not really trying to pretend that I'm perfect and that I don't make mistakes. I definitely do make mistakes. And I'm not afraid to let you see that, because I think it's important, especially if you're just starting out and you're new. When you watch the, like the Instagrammers that everything's perfect and nothing ever gets messed up and they only show you their best work, to me, I think that can be discouraging to people, because it's not the reality. We always make mistakes. Things are going to happen. Things don't turn out the way that you wanted them to always. So I think it's important when you're new and you're just learning that mistakes do happen, and you need to be able to accommodate for those and to not get discouraged and not give up, because the worst thing you can do is make a mistake and then just say, oh, this isn't for me, I'm not good enough. And I hate to see that happen. I know a few people in my personal life that love to paint. I have a good friend of mine who really loves painting, really enjoys it, but won't let herself do it because she always says she's not that good at it. She's too old to start now. And it's sad because she likes it. It's something she enjoys doing, and yet she doesn't let herself just enjoy it because she's not good enough in her mind, and she feels like it's too late in her life to get better. And I really just think it's so sad to me that she doesn't feel like she can do something that she really enjoys and feels kind of passionate about, and she'll do it for a little bit and then she stops because she just says there's no point in it. She's not good enough anyway. And I hate seeing that. So I do like to encourage people to go ahead and keep trying, even if you don't feel good enough. This is not where I wanted to put those. So I'm still trying to decide if I want to make that blue up there. I think I will. Since it's up in this corner here, it's not gonna have a negative effect on anything. So this will be blue, and then these will be red and white. So I'm just gonna alternate how these folds are going. Don't be afraid to flip your paper back and forth to make it easier, so you're working in a direction that's more natural. Now you could do these just with a marker or a pen. I like to do, when I'm doing something like this where I'm creating an optical illusion, I think it's easier to do it in pencil first. But you don't have to. If you feel comfortable enough to go straight with a pen or marker. Then you can do that. So I'm just going to go all the way across here, curving these lines, alternating them. And then the other reason I like to use a pencil is sometimes you get to an area where maybe you need to add something. You can make changes if you need to. And these they're not evenly spaced out, but we're doing more of an abstract type of illusion. So again, not worrying about everything being perfect and even and measuring. I think that can often take the joy out of creating your artwork if you're always so worried about everything being perfect. Sometimes you got to draw right through the letters so you can make sure everything connects correctly. So this is going to be blue with some stars in it. And then these will alternate red and white. I think I'm just going to leave the letters like that. So the next thing I need to do is get a thin black pen. I don't want this to be a real heavy outline. And then go over those. So I'm going to use my same black Sharpie pen that I used earlier. And I'm just going to go over top of all of these pencil lines, clean this up a little bit, erase it, and then I'll be ready to start adding my color in there. And I'll be back when I do that. So now I have a red marker picked out, and I'm going to fill in alternating sections with the red. This one's going to be blue, but I need to put some stars in there first. So I'm going to start here. I would have liked this red to be a little bit lighter, but the other markers, there's the one that's darker, that's a nice bright red, and the other ones seem to be more of a pinkish color. And I need something that's more of a red, that doesn't have as much pink in it. So I'm literally just going to fill this in with solid red. And then I might go in and add some shadows with a colored pencil. That's typically how I like to do these. So this one's going to be blue, red, this one needs to be white, and then this one will be red. And then when I do the other side where there's white, then this one needs to be red. That one's going to be white, this one's going to be red. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to bore you with keeping you on while I'm just filling in these solid colors. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'll come back when that's finished. I went ahead and finished up all of the red for the stripes in the flag, and I added some stars over here. Now the next thing I want to do is, for this type of drawing, to make this optical illusion look more like the flag's waving, I like to use just a regular black colored pencil. This happens to be a Prismacolor, but any kind of colored pencil would work. But what I like to do is use the colored pencil to add some shadows. And I do that with these just short curved lines and curve it the same way. And there's different ways you could do this. You could just shade it, you could use markers, you could use a little bit darker marker on the edges and blend that in. But this is my favorite way to add the shading. I like how it looks on top of the marker. So I'll do one of them down here on the white so you can see a little bit better. There's just a bunch of just kind of little feathered strokes with the black colored pencil. And you can do some lighter and darker. I personally like it when you can see some of the actual pencil lines. So I might fill this in solid right at the edge, and then have it more broken up. And you can go as far over as you'd like, whatever you think looks good. I do like leaving some white area down the middle, but I like to have some variation in here with the lengths. And then you can flip it around and do the same thing on this side. And then I'll do this throughout the entire drawing, and that will finish up this optical illusion waving flag effect. And the important thing with doing this, if you're using a colored pencil, is you do want to make sure your pencil stays pretty sharp in order to get that kind of feathered, tapered look on the ends of the lines. And then you can fill in along the edge so that's not as broken up. And just kind of go by whatever looks right to you. So that's how it would look when it's done. And then I would just do that for each of these. So for these ones, the lines are going to curve this other way. These ones will curve that way, and I'll do that on all of them, including this blue up here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'll be back when that's finished. adding the finishing touches to this, I went ahead and did all of the shading with the black colored pencil off camera. Got that done. One of the things I wanted to mention is it's really important when you're adding the shading here, you want to make sure these lines are curved. You don't want them to go straight across because it will ruin this effect that they're bending. So you do need to make sure that you're following the curves as best you can of these lines. You want to, when you draw your lines, you want to make sure those have a nice curve to them. And then when you do your shading, you want to make sure you're following that same curve. It's a little tricky on the edges because you want to make sure you're going towards the center of these stripes so that you get that little feathered end to it, so it tapers off at the end. And then you can just fill this in a little bit, go back over it to smooth it out. So this drawing's about done. I'm almost finished with it. The only thing left to do is, which is optional, but what I like to do is add some white highlights to the lettering. Just to break up some of the solid color. And I don't do it any specific way necessarily, but I don't like these, I don't like the solid blocks of color. And I try to make them a little bit wider, so as you can see, I'm kind of making almost like scribbles with them. There's a lot of different ways you could do this. You could use a paint marker if you wanted to. You could do solid lines. You could do blocks of white, or of course you could leave the white off altogether. That's up to you. And then there's also some other options here to finish up. You could do some white around the edges. You could make the black bolder. It's just a matter of experimenting, trying different things, see what you like, what you don't like. For me, the most important part for anybody, I think, should be to enjoy it, have fun, try different things. Because you don't know unless you try it. So don't think that the people out there, the Instagrammers that show you all their perfect work and act like they've never made a mistake before, that's not reality. You're going to make mistakes. You're going to try something that doesn't turn out the way that you envisioned it in your head. And you can't let that discourage you or make you think that you're just not good at creating art because you made a mistake or because you tried something and it didn't turn out. You learn what works and what doesn't work and what you like and what you don't like, because everybody's different. Something might look good to me and you could hate it. That doesn't mean that whatever I did was right or wrong. It just, everybody has their own personal opinions about everything, which is fine. But you need to find out what you like and what you think works, and not worry about what everybody else thinks. Because really, if you're creating your artwork and you're a hobby artist, I consider myself a hobby artist. I create art for myself, for my own enjoyment. I'm not trying to sell it. I'm not trying to make a living being a professional artist. I do this because it's relaxing. I enjoy it. It's fun. I share my drawings and these tutorials in hopes of encouraging other people to get past their fears and to do their thing. So if you're not trying to make a living being an artist, then to be honest, it doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks. Just do your thing, have fun, enjoy it, and don't be afraid to experiment. Try different techniques and different ideas and just see what works, what doesn't work, and go from there. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one. Happy creating! Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you feel inspired to create some of your own artwork. Don't forget to check out that description box. There's some links in there, as well as the information on the Facebook group. And also, if you could, give this video a like if you did enjoy it, and subscribe if you want to get notified of future videos. I will see you in the next one. Bye!